Oh, good afternoon and welcome to Asia Society. My name is Philip Ivanov. I'm the CEO of Asia Society in Australia. Welcome to our special Leaders on Asia address live from Melbourne with Francis Adamson, Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. First, Asia Society acknowledges that many participants in today's event are dialing in from locations that have traditional owners and custodians. Today I'm speaking to you from the land of Boon Wurrung and Wurundjeri peoples of the East Kulin Nation, and I acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander or First Nations people joining our webcast today. Let me also acknowledge and thank our co-hosts and major partner of Asia Society, ANZ Bank, represented here by Shane Elliott, Chief Executive Officer. Thank you, Shane, for partnering with us on this program and also for being a member of Asia Society since 1997 and for your leadership and power in Australian business in the region. Let me also acknowledge members of the diplomatic community here and Stuart Fuller, our Chairman of Asia Society in Australia, our board, our advisory council members, and of course our corporate members and our foundation partner, Victorian Government. We're very thankful for your support and contribution, especially in this really tough environment. We wouldn't be able to deliver over 80 programs and 30 publications alone last year without the support of our members and partners. Today's address is special for many reasons. First and foremost because of our speaker, who is leading Australian diplomacy in what we can paraphrase our Prime Minister, an increasingly dangerous, disorderly and contested world. And Secretary, I want to use this opportunity to thank you and DFAT staff all around the world for keeping Australia and Australians safe and for advancing our international interests, helping Australians overseas, of course, and keeping our trade going amidst the pandemic, and while dealing, like many of us, with health and family issues. Unfortunately, we as a country tend to forget just how much DFAT does for us. And so from all of us, Secretary, and thank you and your team for your service. Our program today is also special because it's our first major live event in Melbourne since February last year, and our first major hybrid program, allowing over 50 of you to join us in person. And I was told more than 400 viewing it online as we speak from around Australia and the region. So terrific to see you in person and also all of you virtually. I haven't seen so much interest in our briefings and our publications as in the last 18 months, as geopolitical, economic, public health and social issues in Asia collide and intersect, making navigating Asia so much more complicated for our businesses, for our universities, for state governments and community at large. So we feel very strongly that our mission of keeping Australians informed about Asia and connected to the region has never been more relevant. And as we embark on our strategy, we're proud to deliver our content, our insights to more Australians all around the world than we've never ever done in our 23 years. And as Australia navigates this more contested region, one part of this region most consequential for our future, yet not sufficiently covered by our media or public debate, is Southeast Asia. So we're very glad that Southeast Asia will be the focus of Secretary's remarks today. I'd also like to use this opportunity to direct you to three of our current projects on Southeast Asia. First, Southeast Asian COVID-19 project led by our Executive Director, Richard Maud, that looks at the impact of the pandemic on politics, economy and society. Our Path to Vietnam report, which we work with RMIT University, it's a comprehensive look at market complementarities between Australia and Vietnam. And finally, our Second Chance report launched 2 weeks ago by Trade Minister Dan Tehan, which is sort of our footprint for the business engagement in the region post-pandemic. And a big part of that report is looking at building our market share in Indonesia's healthcare sector. And for those joining us virtually, you can see links to all these projects in the chat function right as we speak. So we're very much looking forward to Secretary's analysis of where Australia's relationships with Southeast Asia are heading. Before I go to today's proceedings, I'd also like to acknowledge Jet Rudley, our long-standing Director of Programs, who is unfortunately leaving us after 5 years, and Jet has dramatically grown and transformed our programming to be one, if not the best in our field. So we thank her and wish her all the best. Let me quickly go through today's proceedings. In a minute, I'll pass it over to CEO of ANZ Bank, Shane Elliott, to officially welcome you and introduce our speaker. Secretary will then speak for about 20 minutes, and we'll be joined by Jennifer Hewett, National Affairs columnist of the Australian Financial Review, in conversation, and then our chairman, Stuart Fuller, will conclude the public session and deliver a vote of thanks. After that, our in-person guests will have an opportunity to ask questions directly to the Secretary, and then we'll conclude our program. So let me now introduce our partner and host. Shane Elliott has been CEO of Australia and New Zealand Banking Group since 1st of January 2016. He joined ANZ as CEO Institutional in 2009 and in 2012 was appointed Chief Financial Officer. He has more than 30 years' experience in international banking, including in Australia, New Zealand, USA, UK, Asia and the Middle East, including 20 years with Citigroup. He's a director of the Financial Markets Foundation for Children, member of Australian Banking Association, the BCA, and the Customs Advisory Board. In August 2018, Shane joined the Leadership Council on Cultural Diversity, having been a strong champion for cultural diversity and leadership throughout his career. Over to you, Shane.
Thank you, Philip, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to ANZ. I think this is actually our first official event in this room. We had this building's 12 years old, but we had it renovated, and the builders gave us back the keys a year ago, just as COVID hit. And so it's great to actually use it and for such a great event, and a really relevant one for ANZ given our business and what we do. So thank you for joining, and particularly thanks for those that are joining on Zoom today. I did want to acknowledge or join in the acknowledgement of our special guest, the Asia Society Australia's chairman, Stuart Fuller, and as well as AFR's National Affairs columnist, Jennifer Hewett, who will be leading the moderated discussion. And thank you for the recognition of ANZ's relationship with the Asia Society. It's been in place for many years now, and it extends to other countries across the region, including Hong Kong. ANZ is the most outward-looking bank in Australia, and it has been since the day we were founded in the 1830s. And so it's right that we have a view and an interest in what is happening in the region of Asia Pacific. Because our purpose as a bank is to connect the trade and capital flows across this region and to help our customers succeed. And to do that, that means we have to be present. And we are today operating really well in 33 countries around the world, 28 of which are in Asia Pacific. And our presence in Southeast Asia is particularly strong. We've been there for nearly 40 years when we first opened our office in Singapore. And let me tell you that being part of Asia is really important to ANZ. We love the Asian business, and in particular our businesses right across Southeast Asia. It's an important part of the family. So today's topic, Australia's relationship with Southeast Asia and the opportunities as a result, is really relevant for us. Of course, ASEAN is one of Australia's largest trading partners, and our family, education, cultural, security and tourism links are significant and growing. Trade between Australia and ASEAN is worth around $124 billion each year and has grown by $55 billion in the past decade alone. It now exceeds trade with the US and Japan. And of course, our industries here are reaping the benefits of this relationship, particularly in resources, agriculture and education. Now there's some movement towards a travel bubble with Singapore, which speaks to the strong relationships we've developed, and we're all obviously hopeful there. We know it's a fast-growing region, which has massive potential for Australia. And to hear more about this, it is my pleasure to introduce Frances Adamson, the Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, to talk to us about Australia's engagement in the region. Secretary Adamson has led the department since 2016, after first joining in 1985. Before being appointed, Ms Adamson was the International Advisor to Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. She's held other senior roles within Australian Parliament, including as the Chief of Staff to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Defence. Ms Adamson has had an impressive career in diplomacy. From 2011 to 2015, she was the Ambassador to the People's Republic of China. She's worked in the Australian Consulate General in Hong Kong, the Australian Commerce and Industry Office in Taipei, and the Australian High Commission in London. Secretary Adamson was educated at the University of Adelaide and received a Distinguished Alumni Award in 2014. And as well as sitting on the Australian Advisory Council of the Asia Society, Ms Adamson is a member of the Export Finance Australia Board, the National Foundation for Australia-China Relations, and the ANU's National Security College. With that background, we are certainly set for a comprehensive and very timely briefing today. So please join me in welcoming the Secretary to the stage.
Thanks very much indeed, Shane, and thank you to ANZ for hosting. I mean, it really is good to be back in a room. I like real, I also like virtual, and I'm conscious that a number of dedicated Asia Society members are joining us virtually too. So great to be able to do this in this way. Let me also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today and pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. Thank you to the Asia Society for bringing us together. As Philip said to me on the way up, he's very persistent. We've been talking about doing this for a long time. I always knew I would, and I think he always knew I would too, but it's great actually to be doing it. And Stuart, really good to see you in this chair role as well. And can I just say what an impressive role the Asia Society has played, what an impressive job it's done over the last year in keeping the dialogue on Australia and our region alive, not just keeping it alive actually, but enriching it. So in addition to you, Philip, I want to acknowledge my dear colleague, Richard Maud. DFAT and the Asia Society work so closely together that we even send you from time to time our very, very best people. I still have the feeling of my right arm having been sawed off. And I also want to acknowledge Andrew Cumston, who's DFAT's State Director here in Melbourne too, as well as members of the Consular Corps. DFAT, of course, has been an enthusiastic partner, and I think something like, at last count, 16 Australian heads of mission have participated in virtual Asia Society events and webinar events over the past year. We've all had to learn new ways of working this year, even think tanks and diplomats. In my years of public service, I have to say I've not encountered such a rapid rate of change in policy and our strategic and indeed operational environment. When I joined the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, already mentioned, actually it was not and trade then, in 1985, things were very different. Then, for example, Australian diplomats were overwhelmingly male. In the last 5 years, I'm very pleased to say, the number of female heads of mission has nearly doubled. We're up at about 43% of the total, including, and I want to draw attention to this because it is significant, the Foreign Minister's announcement last week of Penny Williams' appointment as our first female ambassador to Indonesia. Women now represent half of our senior executive service, and we're a more diverse foreign service. I was fortunate to join at a time, though, when Australia's global engagement and influence was growing. Our country was opening up to the world, and later, with Gareth Evans as Foreign Minister, we were keen to make it a better place. One thing, though, was clear to me then, as it is now, that is the centrality and vital importance of our immediate region. My first real job after training was working on the ASEAN economies, and they've certainly gone from strength to strength. We need to remember, though, that the economic and geopolitical growth of the Indo-Pacific that has transformed the world over the last 3 decades has taken place alongside changes in Australia's domestic policy settings. When Bob Hawke and Paul Keating were reforming Australia's economy, seems like a long time ago now, but the USSR was losing its influence in this region. When the Howard government was leading Australia's response to the East Asian financial crisis, regional demography began to exert its influence on regional economics and strategic weight. As Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard supported Australia through the global financial crisis, China was accelerating its integration into global markets and trade. As the Abbott and Turnbull governments led Australia through a period of great technological change, cracks were emerging in the international rules-based order. And as the Morrison government steers Australia through the pandemic, the United States and China are engaged in a geostrategic competition impacting all elements of global policy. Through it all, the future and fortunes of Australians have been inextricably linked to the Indo-Pacific region. Every Prime Minister and Minister I've had the pleasure of working with has understood this clearly. Governments from both sides of politics have anchored Australian foreign policy in our region. They've invested in building deep and lasting relationships with their counterparts, and they've ensured Australia is a consistent and reliable partner for the countries in our region. The voice, presence and commitment of successive Australian governments has been to our and our region's benefit. We were, for example, the first country to be invited to become a dialogue partner for ASEAN in 1974. And almost 50 years later, in 2020, we've continued to deepen those partnerships by securing a dedicated annual summit with ASEAN. Today, Australian leaders and policymakers are navigating a new and immensely challenging period in the Indo-Pacific. Geostrategic competition between major powers has many dimensions, but it is focused increasingly on the stability and character of the regional order in the Indo-Pacific. Pressure on rules, norms and institutions is more acute, and tensions over territorial claims are escalating. The deployment of new threats like cyber attacks and foreign interference is growing in frequency and sophistication. And of course, COVID-19 has shown that Australia is only as healthy, strong and prosperous as our neighbourhood. Today I'd like to talk about a part of the Indo-Pacific, Southeast Asia, which is absolutely central to its future. Australian diplomacy, the prosecution of Australian interests internationally by Australians, as distinct from legacy empire arrangements, was born out of World War II. Since then, Southeast Asia has been a constant priority for Australia's foreign and strategic policy practitioners. It has been front of mind for DFAT and its partners in government, and it will always be so. The reasons and rationale have evolved, but the centrality and persistence of our focus has not. When we began building our diplomatic networks in the 1940s and 50s, Southeast Asian capitals were among the first to host permanent Australian representation. Today, our 17 posts across 11 Southeast Asian countries continue to reflect that presence and attention. And there is depth as well as breadth. 3 of our 10 largest posts are in Southeast Asia, and almost 30% of our overseas staff are in Southeast Asia. That Southeast Asia is a primary focus of Australian diplomatic effort is testament to the fact that the security and prosperity of this region underpins our own. Since World War II, we've seen and been part of a remarkable transformation in the region, from despair and conflict to optimism, prosperity and openness. The region's entrenched habits of cooperation have also earned ASEAN the role of convener for the wider Indo-Pacific. This is an extraordinary achievement for our neighbours and a great benefit to our own prosperity and strategic circumstances. Australia's presence and agency throughout this journey have helped us build enduring networks and partnerships. Diplomatic achievements like Tom Critchley's UN Good Officers Commission role in Indonesia in the 1940s, Australia's support for the formation of Malaysia in the 1960s, and the Cambodia peace process in the 1980s and 90s are just some examples. Multilaterally, as the first dialogue partner for ASEAN and as a founding member of APEC, the ASEAN Regional Forum and the East Asia Summit, we closely collaborated with Southeast Asian partners, earning a place at the table where we can and do work collectively on setting regional norms. Australia's trade negotiators have worked for decades with their Southeast Asian counterparts to deliver benchmark free trade agreements, first bilaterally with Malaysia, Singapore and Thailand, then regionally with ANSFTA and now RCEP, the world's largest free trade agreement. Through it all, we've developed deep connections between our trade negotiators that will be further bolstered by a $46 million investment in a Regional Trade for Development initiative. This initiative will guide Southeast Asian partners in implementing RCEP and ANSFTA commitments, and in doing so, will ensure these agreements maximise the economic benefits for us all. Of course, DFAT is not alone in this endeavour. Our work builds on the relationships between our defence forces, our border, immigration and customs agencies, and police and security officials, as well as the work of central bankers, Treasury officials, humanitarian and disaster specialists, the TGA, AUSTRAC, and others. And of course, there's a mighty contribution made by think tanks and by the business community. This is also a region from where so many Australians have come or call home, from the Colombo Plan of the 1950s and 60s through to successive waves of migration. Southeast Asian diaspora have enriched the character of modern Australia. The bottom line is this: alongside the Pacific, Southeast Asia is the region that most acutely engages Australia's national interests. This is our neighbourhood, and we have a direct stake in its peace, security and stability. Over the past 5 years that I've accompanied the Prime Minister and Ministers on visits and in meetings, over the last 12 months virtual meetings with Southeast Asia counterparts, I've noticed a discernible change in the nature of the conversation. At times, this has reflected a shift in the dimensions of our engagement, such as new impetus in the economic relationship or evolving threats in the security sphere. But more often, it has reflected the changing strategic and economic environment we share. Like Australia, our partners in Southeast Asia are grappling with the impacts of geostrategic competition and seeking a settling point that does not diminish their voice or agency in the region. While strategic competition is uncomfortable, in Australia's view, it's vital we compete to preserve the liberal international order that has underpinned decades of stability and prosperity in the region. Our partners are also navigating the changing dynamics of their own bilateral relationships. They are dealing with a more assertive, ideological and transactional China, and they are looking to build positive connections with the new US administration. Our partners are positioning for the fourth industrial revolution and dealing with the challenges that presents, including the dislocation of low-skilled workers in an age of artificial intelligence and automation. And our partners are facing new threats, from foreign interference to cyber attacks and other intrusions upon sovereignty. Against this backdrop, Australia's regional engagement must evolve to support the stable and prosperous neighbourhood we need. In charting a way forward, our efforts will build upon recovery, resilience and relationships. Our first priority is recovery from COVID-19. COVID-19 has hit Southeast Asia hard. While Vietnam has bounced back economically, output in Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines and Thailand remains 5% below pre-pandemic levels. The World Bank estimates that tens of millions of people will fall back into poverty across East Asia and the Pacific because of COVID-19. It's a tough outlook, and there's little doubt the slow return of tourism will hamper economic activity. This matters deeply to Australia. Collectively, the ASEAN economies are equivalent to our second largest trading partner. As Foreign Minister Payne has said, just as the region's emergence has assisted Australia's prosperity, how the Indo-Pacific responds to and recovers from COVID-19 will shape the trajectory of our own economic recovery. When the pandemic hit, Australia rapidly reshaped our development program. In just over 3 months, the government redirected $840 million worth of aid to support economic recovery, health security and stability in the Indo-Pacific as part of our Partnerships for Recovery strategy. Getting vaccines to our region is a core part of our recovery plan. Around $300 million will fund the provision of vaccines to 9 ODA-eligible countries in Southeast Asia. A further $21 million will help establish a new ASEAN Centre for Public Health Emergencies and Emerging Diseases. Australia has committed an additional $100 million as part of a vaccine partnership with Quad partners, which aims to provide over $1 billion vaccines to the Indo-Pacific by 2022. This is alongside our $80 million contribution to the COVAX Facilities Fund for Developing Countries, which began delivering vaccines in February. Our support extends beyond vaccines, though. In his annual meeting with ASEAN leaders last November, Prime Minister Morrison announced an additional $500 million package of economic and security measures to support Southeast Asia's recovery. When combined with our ongoing programs and a $1.5 billion loan to Indonesia for budgetary support, this is our most significant investment in Southeast Asia since the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. Our second focus is our commitment to the region's resilience. A new $230 million Mekong-Australia partnership is a flagship example. We're providing scholarships and training to build the capacity of the Mekong sub-region's primary asset, its people. We're sharing our technical knowledge to empower communities to make trade and economic decisions. We're supporting sustainable and quality infrastructure, the backbone of economies. And we're working with partners on environmental sustainability, climate change, water security, and marine pollution. Our third focus is on building stronger relationships. We've engaged heavily in strengthening our regional architecture. Unifying regional architecture provides its constituent countries with greater resilience, strategic autonomy and security than they can often achieve individually. As the Prime Minister has said, we support ASEAN centrality, but also ASEAN cohesion and agency. Our support for the EAS, for ASEAN's own outlook on the Indo-Pacific, and our successful advocacy to secure annual ASEAN-Australia summits are evidence of our commitment to enhanced regional dialogue grounded in ASEAN centrality. As the Prime Minister told his ASEAN counterparts last November, it goes to what Australia brings to ASEAN: a constructive approach, options, balance and deep friendship. This is what we do as neighbours and as strategic partners. We're also ensuring our work in other forums, such as the Quad, sends a positive signal to Southeast Asia of our support for an open, sovereign, inclusive and resilient region, as well as our commitment to advancing practical cooperation that addresses the region's most pressing challenges. And the vaccine partnerships I mentioned is just one example. We've also invested in strengthening our bilateral relationships, and that's something that's been done principally over the last 12 months possibly hasn't got as much attention as it deserves. But we now have comprehensive strategic partnerships with Indonesia, Malaysia and Singapore, strategic partnerships with Vietnam and Thailand, and a comprehensive partnership with the Philippines. These formal partnerships with agreed work agendas send a strong, positive signal of our shared commitment to joint action on regional and bilateral priorities. With Malaysia, for example, our two Prime Ministers have committed to working together on issues as diverse as the digital economy, maritime security and health. We're also advocating for our wider allies and partners to strengthen their engagement with Southeast Asia. A region anchored by strong leadership from the United States is absolutely in Australia's national interest, and we join our partners in welcoming the positive engagement of the Biden administration. We're also working with some of our other partners in Southeast Asia, including Japan, South Korea and India. Finally, I want to speak about Australia's support for human rights and democracy across Southeast Asia. We have been an advocate of good governance and free speech and have worked extensively in support of civil society. We have not shied from difficult conversations with partner governments when we have concerns, and we have used our close partnerships and long-standing presence to exercise leverage and pursue accountability. Where the human rights of people are undermined or violated in our region, Australia will continue to voice our concerns. Today, we do that most strongly in Myanmar, one of the sharpest challenges our region faces. A security, political and humanitarian crisis that is not only catastrophic for the people of Myanmar, but imperils regional stability and mires ASEAN in issues that divert attention from the priorities of economic recovery and strategic agency. We're engaging with our international partners to respond and doing what we can to support the people of Myanmar through our development program without in any way conferring legitimacy on the military authorities. I've spoken today about how Australia projects its voice and positive agenda in Southeast Asia. But as important is how Australia fosters understanding and engagement of our region at home. Australians' understanding and experience of Southeast Asia is a national asset and crucial sovereign capability. It is also one we need to continue to sustain and grow. Recent data indicates a drop from around 2,200 Australian university students studying Southeast Asian languages in 2001 to 1,200 in 2019. We need to find ways to encourage Australian students to learn these languages and promote the business and career opportunities in our region, which is why DFAT is working with the Australia-Indonesia Institute to support the Australia Education Foundation, the Asia Education Foundation, to develop a national rationale for the study of Indonesian language in Australian schools. We're also working to empower Australian communities, businesses and institutions to deepen their links into the region. COVID border closures have disrupted many programs, including migration, international education and tourism, and of course, obviously, the new Colombo Plan. These closures have been necessary and effective, but we have some ground to make up to ensure Australia remains a preferred destination. Similarly, we're enhancing our engagement with Australian business to help them seize opportunities in the region. Diversifying into new markets is never easy, but as the joint report by the Asia Society and the Business Council of Australia released last month said, Australia is exceptionally well positioned to expand trade and investment partnerships and build and grow new businesses and supply chains into the region. And I really want to compliment both the Asia Society and the BCA. It's a very, very strong piece of work. And I want to acknowledge more widely. Big shout-outs today, of course, to the Asia Society, but to other Australian think tanks also, in building greater understanding, knowledge and appreciation of Southeast Asia in Australia, and in fostering dialogue with think tanks in our region. We will remain the closest of partners to that end. I'd like you to leave you with one final thought. The next 5 years will be crucial for Southeast Asia. Charting a recovery from COVID and setting our communities and economies on a more resilient trajectory are immense challenges. But what will ultimately matter most in these coming years is the ability of our region to find the right balance between competing powers and in the face of unsettling trends. A balance in which no one country dominates and all countries, large and small, forge their own futures, cooperate in their common interest and are resilient to coercion. A regional order that supports economic integration based on international rules and norms, and an order that preserves the openness, stability and resilience of our region. In strengthening our Southeast Asian partnerships now, we are positioning Australia to support this order, and that is one of the most important investments we can make in a more secure, prosperous and peaceful future for all Australians. Thank you.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure indeed to be here with Francis. As Shane said, we would be assured of a timely and a comprehensive address, and that was certainly that. Now, what I'm going to do is ask, obviously, some questions which will be streamed, and then later there'll be time for questions from the audience. So prepare your questions as we're speaking now. So, Secretary, you talked about a region that, of course, had gone from, in many ways, despair and conflict decades ago to one that had openness, prosperity, and optimism. But now it's facing, incredible challenges. How optimistic are you that ASEAN can find, and the region can find, that settling point that they're seeking, to where they still have agency and a voice?
Look, I'm naturally optimistic, Jennifer, I should say, but I think there are considerable grounds for optimism. It might be hard to see them now. I think it's a little easier actually to see them now than it was as we were going into sort of deep COVID relatively early on. I think the rollout of the vaccines is providing hope. I think there's been a considerable effort by governments but also by business, and very skilled business, to adapt to this new environment. And although we're concerned at the reduced economic growth at the moment, I think there's also a great deal of transformation going on as well, which provides grounds for optimism. The greater challenge is the one I referred to at the end, this strategic competition, the need to find a balance, the need to ensure that the character of the region, if you like, is one which maintains the sovereignty of individual states. And the Prime Minister's spoken about this quite a lot as well. A region of sovereign independent states resistant to coercion and open to collaboration. And I suppose one of the reasons, though, that I am optimistic is I referred to at a number of occasions I've been in bilateral meetings involving Prime Minister and ministers, virtual summits of many different descriptions. And I think there's a strong sense of purpose. There's a clear-eyedness about the challenges that we're facing. We see across the region a very strong desire to deepen relationships with capable partners, and of course Australia is a capable partner and has demonstrated that time and time again. But neither do I think there's anything automatic, if you like, about a happy ending. And I think there is an enormous amount of heavy lifting that's going to be required, creativity and a determination. And I think we can all envisage what we want. That certainly helps. Being clear-eyed about what the challenges are also helps. And I think across the region there's a strong desire on the part of the people of the region. They want continued peace, they want continued stability, they want continued prosperity.
Okay. Well, of course, we'll talk a little bit about that geostrategic competition and what that means, but we've also got the emergence of sudden crises like Myanmar, for example. So you've got a summit coming up on Saturday. I believe the Thai Prime Minister has now pulled out. How optimistic are you that that can actually achieve anything to change what's going on in Myanmar?
Well, I think from the outset, the individual countries of ASEAN and ASEAN as an organisation has been sort of engaged, if you like, understands the full import of what a coup in Myanmar has meant. I think there's been a lot of diplomacy undertaken behind the scenes, and I think the Indonesian Minister for Foreign Affairs, Retno Marsudi, has been very active in all of this as well too. It's not once it's happened, it's not an easy thing. That it can't be fixed with one meeting, if you like. And ASEAN foreign ministers coming together as they did earlier, that was a significant achievement to be able to do that, even if virtually. A leaders meeting, ideally with as many leaders present as possible. There are always reasons why some of them aren't able to attend. That will also be an important step along the road. Along the road to what? A de-escalation and ultimately a pathway back to democracy. These things are inherently challenging, and of course there is a great deal of concern. Everyone understands how important it is to reduce the violence, to stabilise the situation, and there's a strong commitment at leader level across ASEAN to do it. It won't be easily achieved. This meeting will mark an important milestone.
Okay. Now, the other thing that happened this week, of course, was the Boao Forum, where I'm sure you were a regular attendee as well. Now things have changed kind of dramatically, but as part of that, Xi Jinping was talking about dismissing and criticising any talk of economic decoupling and the Cold War going on, and insisting that was not happening. Do you actually think there is a Cold War at the moment, and is it going to stay there indefinitely?
We certainly don't describe it in those terms. Others,
very diplomatic.
Well, others may. I just don't think it's a helpful description. Actually, I mean, I think, and if I hark back to my time in China and my many visits to Boao, the Boao Forum for Asia, there has been a tendency in China, if you like, to resort to the Cold War terminology label, if you like, anytime there are sort of differences of opinion. And I think, that belonged to that era. We need to focus on the here and now and the present and the future, and that means a region where leaders can engage each other in dialogue and where differences can be resolved. I mean, this goes obviously to some extent to Australia's own situation, but the government's been pretty clear that we want a constructive relationship with China. I think if there were anything remotely approximating a genuine Cold War, that would not be the case. So I think we've got to be able to see through the language that is used for particular purposes, look at the realities and work through them.
Mm. Well, another undiplomatic term is, of course, hot war, and people have become increasingly concerned about that in relation to Taiwan, for example. How do you see, that situation developing in the next couple of years?
Well, look, I think, whatever the temperature is, if you like, everyone's pretty clear that conflict is to be avoided, and an enormous amount of effort goes into that. I think it's a relatively easy thing to talk up the potential for conflict. It certainly attracts headlines, it focuses minds, but there's a great deal of diplomacy that needs to go into ensuring that any potential flashpoints across the region, and Taiwan's certainly one of them, are properly managed by people who understand the sensitivities. And I suppose there are some risks around it, of course. And I think one of the things that has obviously now brought it more to the fore is China's growing military capability. I recall when I first visited Taiwan in 1987, people saw the military balance, if you like, as unlikely to shift before about 2030. Well, we're now in 2021, and 2030, if indeed that was ever the precise date, is rather closer. And what that does is really put a premium on ensuring that the situation can be properly managed. And that means cross-straits tensions properly managed by Taipei and by Beijing, and also properly managed by partners, the foremost among them, of course, the United States.
Well, in that context, what difference do you think the advent of the Biden administration has meant and will mean for the region?
For the region, I mean, obviously there's a degree of continuity, although there's been an enormous amount of attention focused on, the personalities of presidents, if you like. But in terms of deep, enduring national interests, I think there's a real continuity there. And the Trump administration was the Obama administration was with its pivot. The Trump administration was as well with its focus on the need to compete. The signal difference, if you like, of the Biden administration is a genuine focus on allies and partners, a willingness to consult and to engage. And I think it's already evident. I mean, here we are in April. The president was sworn in on the 20th of January. So in a relatively short time, already I think there's a sense of a degree of stabilisation going on. And of course, the United States have been very clear, and clear language is really important. Clear language backed by action, clear intent, clear capability is very important. But the idea that there'll be some areas as part of this overall strategic competition, some areas of collaboration. Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State's made that clear. Areas of competition where that's needed, and if necessary, there will be elements of an adversarial relationship where they must, is what they've said. And I think clarity around that has been very important. There's a lot still to play out, but I think the Biden administration has been very strongly on the front foot very quickly with the appointment of key people to the National Security Advisor position, to the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defence, President, the Vice President. I'm pleased to say I've now got a US counterpart, and I spoke to Wendy Sherman yesterday. But all of those relationships, has been a lot of outreach, a lot of high-level meetings, a lot of clear understanding. And I was, what I said in my speech, the US can be an anchor in the region, a presence which helps stabilise, and of course a force for economic growth, in addition to the engine that China represents and other countries do too. So I think they're back on the field, if you like. There's a lot of work to be done, but they've got a very experienced team, and across the region we see responses, positive responses. It's about options, it's about engagement, it's about balance, and it's about trying to stabilise a region so that we can get on with the security and prosperity, stability and prosperity part of it.
Well, of course, the US is back on the field, as you suggested, but Australia in many ways has been on the front line of a lot of it, partly because of our economic relationship, and also because of the fact that we are in many ways more vulnerable to the prospect of economic coercion, economic threats. How is this situation going to keep on going, do you think? Is it going to get worse?
Situation, sort of in what sense?
Well, in terms of the threats that against Australian trade, for example, we've seen obviously many examples of that.
Yeah. Well, look, I think the Australian people would expect to see, and will continue to see, their own elected government willing to defend Australia's national interests, whatever that may be. Of course, what we want, though, is a constructive relationship with China, and that message is being consistently sent, and we'll be patient. We're ready to resume dialogue without preconditions. There's a lot of contact at the official level between our embassy in Beijing and Chinese officials, and China's embassy in Canberra and our officials, but of course we'd like to be able to resume a dialogue at a political level, and we're ready to do that at any time. You made the point, though, that Australia's been perhaps first to encounter rather than on the front line some of these challenges. But I think they're actually challenges that others across the region, across the globe, are also encountering. Where are your red lines? What are the things that are most important to governments around the world? And to what extent are they willing, if you like, to speak in defence of those interests, in defence of those values, to work with partners to achieve them? It's about clear messaging. It looks untidy at the moment. It feels uncomfortable. There is uncertainty. And that is only to be expected in a situation like this. But I think it would be wrong to think of Australia as sort of alone or isolated. That's not where we are at all. I think there's growing understanding of the issues that we've been facing. Others are needing to deal with them. And everyone's pretty clear about where we would all like the settling point to be.
Well, it certainly does look untidy at the moment, but are you confident, though, that in 5 years' time, you look back, you said all the tensions that have grown over the last 5 years, do you think that in another 5 years there'll be less tension?
I'd certainly like to think that there will be, and the job of a diplomat is absolutely focused on that. We've got some very good diplomats. There are diplomats across the region. I mean, there's a lot of focus being put on defence spending, on military capability across the region. And that's all there for a purpose, and part of that purpose is deterrence. But the job of diplomats is to ensure that it doesn't need to be used. So I'll back my profession, and I'll in 5 years' time, you and I might catch up and see how it's all gone.
Well, I'm glad you're backing your profession, and obviously you're an outstanding example of it. And I'd now like to invite the Chairman of the Asia Society, Stuart Fuller, to come up and give a formal vote of thank you. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. So my name's Stuart Fuller. I'm the Chairman of the Asia Society in Australia, and I've got the very easy job today of concluding the event and proposing 2 votes of thanks. So first, Secretary Francis, to you, thank you so much. Our paths first crossed in China back many years ago, and it's been fantastic to know you. But thank you for your insights today in your speech, very clear words, as you said in your answer, and helping us to really understand the complexity of the region. So I think we've been very lucky to have you here with us today. But also thank you for your leadership and your engagement and your contribution to the Australian community and government and public service over your career. As Shane said in his introduction, it's quite a formidable career, and we're lucky to have people like you. And as you said, we're very persistent here at the Asia Society, so thank you, lastly, for making time in your schedule. Difficult to imagine the demands on your time, and we are a persistent lot, but we're very, very grateful for you sharing some time with us today. And as you said, this is a very critical time for Australia and the region and Southeast Asia in particular. And as you were speaking, as you were saying, the centrality and the importance of the region, the growth ambition and the growth prospects for Australia in the region, but also our contribution to stability in the region, and particularly around recovery, resilience and relationships. Those sort of comments really resonated with me. I think you said the second largest trading bloc for Australia would be Southeast Asia, and I think it does us all good to remember that as we look out and look at where growth can come from in the post-pandemic world, but also the importance of the people-to-people connections. I learned from myself living in Asia for 6 years that's fundamental. So as we emerge from a only virtual world back into the real and combined real and virtual world, those connections and driving those relationships is fundamental, and ensuring that Australia retains a strong role and a strong voice of influence in the region. I think that's fundamental for all of us. You also said depth and breadth, and I thought, and that resonated a lot with me, very much just around the Asia Society's commitment to the region. We look at the drivers for us going forward, dealing with a more complex Asia, how we trade and invest smarter to grow faster as a nation, and you touched on that in your remarks, how we learn to live with China, which is fundamental, but also, as you also said, how we understand Asia, and the next generation of Australians having a higher degree of Asia competency than maybe the current, and language being but a small part of that. So I think across business, policy, government, arts, culture, education, this is where the Asia Society Australia sees itself playing a valuable role helping to create that shared future of Australia and the region. And we're absolutely committed to doing that. Secondly, to Shane and the team at ANZ, thank you so much for hosting us here today in your renovated building. It is lovely to be back in a real environment, and I'm conscious saying that there's more than 300 people virtually. So as we adjust to the now mixed world of real events and digital events and delivering those with impact. But thank you to you and the team. We are deeply grateful for the relationship we have with ANZ. As you said in your opening remarks, the overlap of our interests as a think tank for Asia in Australia and the business of ANZ is quite substantial. But it's a long and enduring partnership, and we're very, very grateful for it. And we're here to help, support, provide insights and to assist. Thank you to all of our members and guests who joined us virtually today. It is different when you're not in the room. I've experienced that myself, but we're grateful for you making the time. Our next session is, in fact, tomorrow. So, as Philip said, the Asia Society Australia is prolific in its events and its insights. We're not just persistent, but we're prolific. But tomorrow's event is on Biden and Asia, perspectives from the region, with a range of people speaking. And I think personally that's going to be an absolutely fantastic event. So lastly, I'd just like to draw to a conclusion the combined real and virtual event today, and to wish all of our members and guests who are coming to us through Zoom a very good afternoon, and thank you very much for making the time to join us today. So thank you.